It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
I dived back into Anna Rubinstein's book, The Making of Men, and looked at rites of passage and what it is to be a man-child versus a boy-child. What it is to be a man versus a man-child.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Today on the Happy Families podcast, we're taking a break from parenting. Once a month, Kylie and I review the books that we've been perusing. We've been reading. We've been
devouring
a whole lot of books because we went on that cruise. We had time to read. I've got 7 books that I could talk about today.
Well, clearly
in the last month.
Clearly, I was not holidaying well enough because I only got through 3 on the cruise.
You holidayed pretty hard. I
was ready to pick up book number 4, and I had 2 books left out of my pile of 5 I was hoping to get through. And it was Love Story by Trent Dalton.
Yes, which I reviewed on our podcast a couple of months ago.
Or Parenting Revolution by some guy I don't really know what his last name was.
That's right. You took my book with me and with us on the cruise. And
I said to you, I'm not sure which book I should read. I can't believe it. And you looked at me with absolute just bewilderment that there was actually a choice in this.
The Parenting Revolution by Dr. Justin Coulson. It has to be. Incidentally, I know that it's been on your bedside table. Have you started reading it yet?
Well, I told you I read the back cover. It's getting closer. It's literally at the top of the pile.
It's the best book I've ever written. I'm so excited about it.
Well, I will definitely be reviewing it next month.
I've run a couple of workshops on this. The Resilient Kids Conference, we're talking about it because it's about raising resilient kids. I shared it to a whole lot of parents at Churchy in Brisbane, as well as some parents over in Perth. It's one of the best workshops I've ever done because it's built on one of the best books that I've ever written, probably the best book I've ever written, and you read Dalton's Love Stories.
It's not on my list this month, so we'll talk about it next month.
Yeah, I hope so. Okay. Well, why don't you kick us off with the books that you've read? And obviously, you're not going to talk about all of them. You might want to mention them, but you'll only talk about, I presume, 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, I've got 2 highlighted.
Because we always talk for too long about too many books.
So the 4 books that I read Love Story by Trent Dalton.
Okay.
You've obviously already talked about it.
Yeah.
So we don't really need to go into it too much.
Did you agree with me? I said the highs are brilliant, but overall I just couldn't really love it. I didn't love the book, but the highs make the book worth reading. Like, it's still amazing to read those awesome stories.
Yeah, I agree. Overall, I think that it was definitely worth reading.
Yeah. But I did want to sit down and talk to him and tell him about our love story. Did you feel that as you were reading it? It's like, I
wish he had heard our story.
I'd love to have just sat down with Troy and say, mate, this is a love story. You ready? Here we go. Write this one down.
But what I did love was how he took, again, it's the same kind of concept that we have talking about, just those tiny moments that if you're not intentional, you'll miss. And how he was able to just see the love story in the simplest of sacrifices.
And he honoured everybody's story. Yeah. I love how you're not talking about the book that we've just talked about.
No, so I'm not talking about Trent Dalton.
Okay.
So the next book I want to review is called The Wedding Party by Kylie.
Yeah, you picked this one up at a secondhand bookshop.
I did. I love going to the book exchange. And I actually saw it at Big W just recently. So it's a current book.
Okay.
But it deals with a family that is broken by addiction, and years later, mum and dad decide to remarry. And so in the process of that, the children, who all are now fully grown adults in their own relationships, they're trying to deal with their own emotions around mum and dad coming back together, and kind of their lives unfold through the process.
Now, before you go on, I have to ask, is this a book you're talking about?
No.
Okay. So what do you give it out of 5?
Look, I'd give it a 3. There was lots and lots of themes in it, and it just, I don't know.
And you're going to keep on talking about it. Okay.
It was worth reading, but it wasn't one of the books that I loved.
All right. So we're not talking about love stories. We're not talking about The Wedding Party.
So the book that I will talk about, one of the books, is called I'll Leave This With You, and it's by Kylie Ladd. This is actually a story about a donor's family.
So a family who's got a loved one who's passed away, but who donated their organs.
And one of the family members left behind her need for closure. She really, really struggled with this whole process. And so at some point in time, she comes up with this idea that she wants to actually contact the recipients of her brother's donations.
What a novel idea. Now, is it a true story? It's a novel.
It's not a true story, but it is touching on an area that's actually quite grey.
This could be tricky. I'm just thinking, you haven't talked to me about this book, but I'd imagine that these organs could have gone to any number of people in any number of ways.
There's actually laws that have been passed to kind of negate families, recipients, and the donors' families being able to come together.
Yeah, because that could be complicated. You might form some really difficult relationships. They've had some dependencies.
Yeah, they've had some really kind of negative outcomes, either kind of stalkish behaviour for people who haven't been able to let go of their loved ones. There's also people who've demanded payment and ongoing payment. So there's lots of.
But there can also be judgment, right? Like let's say that your husband or your wife's heart goes to somebody and you don't see them as being worthy of it because of the lifestyle choices that they've made. You don't like that. I'm like, this could be a really
ethnicity or any number.
Yeah, political persuasion, any number of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
so
fascinating.
For anyone to make contact, it actually has to go through the donor transplant centre.
Right. And then they make the call.
They often will remove all names. And so you might get a letter to say, thank you, we really appreciate it, blah, blah, blah. But there's no identification on it. But there isn't a law that stops it. So if both parties are open to it, then they can.
Wow.
And so this is a story essentially about a family who decides to go down that road and
find out who got
some
what.
family members aren't for it.
Right.
Like, it actually causes quite a rift because it's opening up old wounds, and they're all dealing with grief in different ways. But ultimately, it's this beautiful exploration of life and what it means to give and to sacrifice. And I really, really loved it. It was a very different read to something that I would normally read.
I can hear it in your voice. How many stars do you give it?
It would be definitely a 4.
Okay. All right. I feel like you've almost convinced me to read it. No, seriously, it sounds really compelling.
Well, I donated that one to some people in Tahiti, so you'll need to buy your own copy.
Right. So you said there were 4. We don't really have time for you to talk about a fourth one, but let's do it.
The last one's called The 100 Years of Lenny and Margot.
Oh, you've raved to me about this.
And this was by Marianne.
Is it a 5-star book?
It is.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say it. I could tell by the way you spoke about it. So what's it called again?
It's called The 100 Years of Lenny and Margot.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked it up purely on the cover. I didn't even really read what it was about. And again, just at the exchange, cost me a couple of dollars. And it is just this magnificent, heart-wrenching story about a 17-year-old girl with a terminal illness. And she's been in hospital and she doesn't even know what month or what day it is because she has been there for so long. And she's just such a quirky character, and the people that she meets in the hospital. And so the hospital gets a grant to create an art therapy space, and she is being encouraged to join her peers. But because of the challenges she's had with health her whole life, she has never felt like she fitted in. But she finds herself in the class with the elderly, and they tell her she can't be there.
Yeah.
So she instantly gravitates to this 83-year-old woman, Margot. And Margot and her just like soulmates, instant connection. And so she gets permission to be able to stay with them and do her art with them. And as they're talking, just the way Lenny's brain and mind thinks, she goes, "We've been alive for 100 years between the two of us." And so they decide to create 100 paintings to represent the lives that they've lived, knowing full well that they won't ever be able to fulfill their life's dreams, I guess. And it's the journey of that unfolding.
It sounds like the ultimate tearjerker.
It really is, but in such a beautiful way. You're not left feeling heavy at the end. It's just such a beautiful celebration of life and seeing things differently.
I watched you read it and you ugly cried. So I'm going to dive into the books that I have been reading, and I'm going to be really brief because, unlike you, I'm not going to talk about the ones that I'm not going to talk about, but I will mention them. The ones that I'm not going to talk about include The Making of Men by Anna Rubinstein. Because I'm getting into a book that I'm writing about raising boys, I dived back into Anna Rubinstein's book, The Making of Men, and looked at rites of passage and what it is to be a man-child versus a boy-child. What it is to be a man versus a man-child. Another book that I read called Man Raises Boy by Rob Sturrock. Lots of facts by a guy who was very, very good at talking about what. Like the what. Here's the problem. What is the problem? Let's talk about all of the challenges that we're facing as we're raising boys. It wasn't a lot in there, though, about the why it's happening or the how we can deal with it, because he's a new dad of a couple of little kids. And so this was his exploration of here's what world I'm bringing my kids into. I actually quite enjoyed the book, but not one that I'm going to talk about today. Another one that I read was, we were on the ship and somebody said, I've just finished this book, I'm not sure what to do with it. And I said, I'll read it. What is it? I kind of got it around the wrong way. Instead of, what is it? I'll read it. I said, I'll read it. What is it? And by then I'd committed to it. It was the biography of Gina Reinhardt by Adele Ferguson. And it was actually really interesting to read it, but I don't recommend it. And I was completely unimpressed. The book itself was fine, but the character in the book was just not that exciting to read about, I have to be perfectly honest. However, the three books that I am going to talk about for about 1 minute each, because I do need to be quick. Number one, Ray Dalio, a hedge fund manager. In fact, he runs the biggest hedge fund on the planet. It's called Why Nations Succeed or Fail. I gave it 4.5 out of 5, Kylie. Very heavy on economics. Completely out of my wheelhouse.
I don't even remember seeing you read it.
That was that great big thick one with the black cover. You were so busy reading your books that you probably didn't even notice what I was reading.
Did you take it on the cruise?
Yes. Yeah, I bought it right before we got on the boat. You don't remember seeing with all the charts and the economic stuff? And
No, I did not.
Why Nations Succeed or Fail by Ray Dalio. I read this off the back of having read Guns, Germs and Steel, because an economist friend of mine said, Jared Diamond, nothing. You got to read Dalio, Why Nations Succeed or Fail. I rate Diamond much higher than Dalio in terms of a rip-roaring read to understand the history of the world and why nations are succeeding and failing. However, economists would probably feel differently. Basically, fascinating look at cycles and economic cycles and how we are where we are and what's happened in the world to make it the way that it is economically. I didn't love his style, but I found the content and concepts pretty fascinating. So 4.5.
It sounds like a you book.
It was not really a me book. It was really, really heavy. I really struggled with it, but worth the read and quite compelling. The other one that I want to talk about is by Jonah Berger. Jonah Berger works at the Wharton School. He's a professor of psychology there, and he's written a book called Magic Words. This is right up my alley. This is the way our language shapes our reality and the way changing our language can change the experience that we have and the expectations we might have for life, and certainly the expectations that other people have of us. Really practical, really fun, beautifully well, like really accessibly written. You don't have to have a PhD in psychology to understand it. And it's made me rethink the way that I use my words. The words that I do say, the words that I don't say, why I say it, why I frame things one way or not another, and how I can shift things around. I loved it. Magic Words, I'm giving it 4.5. But the book that I really am excited about is a book that is provocative. It's a book that's controversial, and it was brilliant. I'm giving it 5 stars. The name of the author is Carol with an E at the end, not at the start. That wouldn't be Carol if it was an E at the start. Carol Hooven, Hooven. Carol Hooven. And the book is called Testosterone, the story of the hormone that dominates and divides us. I felt like I needed to have a PhD in endocrinology to read it. It was heavy. It was really tough, but it's such a controversial time to be talking about things like testosterone, what makes males and females, and what happens when we interrupt or engage with that process with interventions. It's not a political book. It's really purely scientific. I really don't know where she sits on the political spectrum, but I know exactly where she sits on the biological spectrum because of the way she's written it, and it is fascinating. It's sensitive. It's gentle to anyone who has been through any challenges when it comes to endocrinology, hormones, and particularly for families who have been struggling around testosterone, children with identity issues. It's really sensitively written, and it's so compelling. I just loved it. Absolutely brilliant. Left me feeling completely and entirely inadequate in terms of my understanding and comprehension and knowledge when it comes to how hormones work in our body. I mean, it was really, really deep, but just profoundly powerful. And it's already affected the way that I'm teaching some of the things that I do in my presentations. And I know that Carol Hooven is going to be quoted a lot in my next book because she did such a masterful job in writing about testosterone.
Well, I think that's a wrap for this month.
Don't you want to ask me about the book?
No, I don't.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
But it was so good. I just want to talk about it. Can't believe you're wrapping up the podcast. I've just talked about 4 books and you're like, okay, thanks, let's wrap it. So that's fine. Let's wrap it. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Roll. I'm from Ridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. Glad you enjoyed those books, Justin. Next.
I'm so glad you enjoyed those books, honey.
We'll link to all the books in our show notes. Hopefully you'll find something there that is interesting for you to dive into and engage with. And let us know what you think about what we're reading and whether it's fun. Oh, by the way, we're doing something new for our Happy Families Premium members. If you are a Happy Families Premium member, we're doing a once every couple of months book club. I'm running it. We're talking about parenting books only. And the first book that we've just talked about is this book by me, The Parenting Revolution by Dr. Justin
Funny
Coulson.
that.
I just had to make sure that we got everyone who is a member to read that one and talk about it first. But we're going to be doing a whole lot more with Book Club, and if you'd like to read parenting books and talk with me about them, just become a Happy Families Premium member today. You can get all the details at happyfamilies.com.au.